Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel and check the video out today. I want to give some tips and advice on how to not lose fish. If you're losing bass or you've had problems with losing fish, there's quite a few things that you can do to really counter that. Some things that you can't do. We're going to talk about both a little bit, but anyway, I sort of want to do a deep dive, advanced discussion on some things you can do to really help yourself not lose as many fish in today's video. Also, guys, just a quick reminder that Tackle Warehouse started their Black Friday sale a couple days ago. They've got like 20% off on almost everything on their website, guys. If you are interested in buying some tackle, there's not a better time to get it right now. So I'll put my Tackle Warehouse Black Friday sale link in the description. If you guys could use and bookmark that link, that's a good way to help the channel out and get you some good tackle too. So appreciate that. Okay, first of all, guys, we're going to talk about two different elements here. I want to talk about some of the reasons that there's nothing that you can do about it, and then the reasons that you can actually correct. Now, first of all, you're going to have to accept the fact. Now, here's a difficult reality to accept in bass fishing. Sometimes you can do everything right. You can have the right hooks, you can have the right hook set, you can have the right rod and reel, everything. You can have it perfectly and execute it perfectly, and you're still going to lose that fish, because one of the things that you do not have control over is actually how a fish bites the lure. Now, based upon a lot of different factors, based upon the angle that they bite your lure at, based upon how far they get your lure in your mouth, a lot of different factors with that. Sometimes the way they bite the lure is the reason that you're not going to land the fish, and there's nothing that you can do about it. That's just a sort of a given. It's like either good luck or bad luck. And it took me a while to realize this, because I always felt that, if I was losing fish, there was always something that I could do, not to lose them. And that's simply not the case. I mean, because I have spent decades trying to figure out how to land every bite that I get. And it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what anyone does. You're still going to lose some. So after we get done with this video and I give you some tips and advice on, things you can do not to lose as many fish, and you're still losing them, just accept the fact that sometimes the way that a bass takes a lure in its mouth, or nips at a lure, or doesn't quite get it, or maybe you move the lure at the exact same time the fish is trying to bite the lure and you just skin hook the fish. Some things you just can't fix. I mean, that's just a big part of it. So you're going to have to sort of accept that reality of the situation. Okay, now let's talk about the things you can do to land more fish, the things that are in your control, the controlled variables. And there's quite a few of them with that. First of all, use the proper equipment with that. One of the things that you can do, there's three things that you can do as far as equipment that really will help you land more fish. Number one is your rod action. Number two is the type of line you use. And number three is the type of hooks that you use. Now, most hooks that are available on the market today are good. I mean, I use the Gamakatsu G Finesse models, a lot of other good companies out there. So it's not necessarily that you're dealing with a poor quality hook, but I'll give you guys one tip on here. Most of the time, you're probably using a hook that's a little bit too big. I have experimented extensively with hook size, and it's sort of counterintuitive and it sort of doesn't make sense. But I always felt that if I went to a larger hook, I would up my chances of landing more fish, and it worked the opposite. When I went to bigger hooks, I started losing more fish, and it took me a long time to actually force myself to try to use smaller hooks than what I thought was really necessary. Now, once I did that, I started landing a lot more fish, simply because a smaller hook is usually smaller diameter, and it's easier to penetrate. One of the things on hooks that are the most important as far as landing fish or not landing fish is not necessarily the barb or how sharp the hook is, but it's the diameter of the wire. So a smaller wire hook is always going to be better, because you've got to get that hook and the barb into the fish. That's the main thing about not losing them, and it's more difficult to get a larger diameter hook in there. So first thing you can do is, try to maybe force yourself to go to just a little bit smaller size hook. If you buy a lure from the factory, try putting just the next size hook down smaller on it. I know that's hard for people to do, but that's one thing that's really helped me out a lot. Next thing you can do is your fishing line has a lot to do with it. Now, there's 3 different types of fishing line, and they all have different properties. You have braided line, which has 0 stretch. You have monofilament line that has the most stretch, and you have fluorocarbon line that has, more stretch than braid, but less stretch than monofilament. So in my opinion, the best line to use is a fluorocarbon line. The only time that I don't use a fluorocarbon line is if I'm fishing a topwater lure. And if I'm fishing a topwater, depending upon the topwater, I'm usually using braided line or monofilament line. Or if I'm fishing something like a buzzbait or a frog, maybe heavy duty flipping braided line. But for most part, ever since I started going to fluorocarbon line, I've landed more fish. And in correlation with that is the rod action that you use. Now, rod action has a lot to do with it because you have a lot of different factors involved based upon the lure that you're using. If you're using some type of a reaction lure where you're throwing the bait out there and you're reeling that bait through the water, you need to have some type of a rod that has some type of give on the tip. You don't want a really, really stiff rod, because when you're reeling, say you're reeling that crankbait through the water or that spinner bait like that, when that fish comes up and inhales that bait, if you have a little bit softer rod, as the fish actually flares its gills and sucks water through its gills, it will pull that rod tip back a little bit. And it will allow that bait to get just a little bit deeper into the fish's mouth, and thus allowing you to hook the fish better. If you're using that reaction type lure with a stiff rod and that fish inhales it, you don't have the flex in there, and the bait may not get this far back in there. And on the flip side with that, when you're fighting a fish, a softer tipped rod is always better. It's like a soft tip rod is more desirable to land a fish with once you do have the hook penetrated, because it's more forgiving on short runs. Now, if you're using a rod, or if you're using a technique that you actually have to generate force to put the hook into the fish, like a worm or football head jig or a jig or something along those lines, that's when you need to use a little bit more stiffer tip on there, because you need that stiff tip to actually move that hook into that fish's mouth. So make sure that you have the right rod action when you're, as far as for the category of the lure that you're using. The next thing you can do, guys, is your hook set has a lot to do with it. And here's another one of those things, like the small hook deal that I was talking about. It's sort of counterintuitive. Most of the time when you're losing fish, you're setting the hook too hard. Now, I don't mean that when you get a strike, you just need to not do anything and just reel it in. But you need to get past the mentality of setting the hook, actually where you got a bite and you reel out and you set that hook. You don't want to do that. You want to get into the frame of mind is when you throw out there and you get that strike, just keep reeling and pull into the fish like that. You don't want to just give this slack and pull like that. Because what happens a lot of times, 2 different things. Number one is the force of setting that hook really hard. Sometimes if that hook goes into like a soft part of the fish's mouth, it's going to rip a hole in that fish's mouth, and that fish will jump off easier. Another time is like, say for example, bass comes up and they inhale your whole jig like that. They got it in their mouth and they're swimming off with it like that. If you set the hook super forcefully, a lot of times you'll force that fish's mouth open from the force of it, and you don't get the hook in. It just shoots out real quick without the hook penetrating. But if you throw out there and you get that bite and you just start reeling and pulling like that, number one is if you're in that thin part of the mouth, it just keeps pushing that hook farther in there without actually tearing it. And on a bigger hook like this, if you keep reeling and pulling, that fish, as that fish, it's not, number one, you're not going to force that fish's mouth open, but the pressure that you're putting by constantly reeling and pulling back is continually forcing that hook point further into the fish there. So in other words, pull and reel. Don't set the hook and jack it like that. You're going to lose a lot more fish, by doing that. Those are the main things, guys. Once you take care of your hook size and diameter, and your line and rod and reel, and your actual equipment control, and then your hook set, that's about all you can do. Your hook set, your line, your rod, type of hook you're using. Once you've identified and made the correct adjustment in that, and you're still losing fish, it's probably because the way the fish bit the lure, and there's not much you can do about it. So don't feel bad. It's like if you lose the fish based upon that, and you've done everything wrong, just say, well, good job, fish, you got away from me. And one other thing, guys, that'll help you out too about not losing the fish is when you're fighting a fish, always try to keep the fish coming to you. In other words, say for example, you throw out there and you get a bite. Okay, reel fast and try to get that fish coming to you, and keep reeling. And if that fish all of a sudden swims past you down the boat, say for example, I'm in the boat right now and I'm reeling like this, and here comes the fish, and he starts going down that way. Don't try to force the fish back there. Follow the fish around the boat if you have to. You always want to keep that fish going in the same direction. And in the case, say it's a big fish, and you can't do that anymore, and that fish is taken out to open water, that's when you want to push your free spool and let that fish have line. Don't try to turn the fish. Let that fish go out there until the fish turns itself, and then get him coming back again. So in other words, don't ever try to reverse the direction of a fish, because when you try to reverse the direction of a fish, even if you have the power to do that, a lot of times you're turning that hook at a weird position inside of that fish's mouth to where it will come unhooked. So once you got that fish hooked, always keep it coming in the same direction. Don't try to reverse directions on it. You'll lose a ton of fish like that. So anyway, hope it helps out, guys, and we'll talk later.